Hello and welcome everyone. Today I'm going to play a talk by Ajahn Sumedho or Longpor Sumedho. And I chose this talk. I just heard it recently. It was a talk that he gave in July, the day before his 86th birthday. And it's a talk that I've never heard another insight meditation teacher give, somebody with sort of his, I don't know what the word is, stature or, decades of practice. I mean, he trained with Ajahn Chah. He's been at this for his entire life. Yeah, and I did meet him when he came to Ottawa about 15 years ago, and he's quite a powerful being just to be around. And so he kind of walks the talk in terms of the practice. In insight meditation, we generally teach the gradual path of purifying the mind. And it's, decades long, if not multiple lifetimes long process of slowly purifying the mind and ridding them of defilements, fetters, hindrances, and so on, which we do talk about in this group. But we also talk about the direct path, which is simply seeing through the illusions of the mind, the illusion that you are in control, the illusion that that you can, have things a particular way just through force of your will. Seeing through these illusions, and I've been calling this the direct path. So it's just simply perceiving through wise view. And Ajahn Sumedho points to this in his talk. So it really struck me as the way that it joins together the direct path teachings and the insight meditation teachings. And I'm not sure he does it intentionally, but he's definitely doing that for me, at least in this talk. So I'll just proceed with the talk and then leave some time.
So there's one thing we were discussing the other day, which I think many people would enjoy hearing you talk about, is how you speak about Dhamma as being pure consciousness. Could you say something about that, please?
And that's when you meditate, when you do the kind of meditation, not on concentration, but on reflection, you begin to recognize that words have no empty quality, they just are phenomena that arise and ceases. And I remember struggling in my early years with Buddhism, trying to define everything with words, wanting to take the Pali words and seek their equivalents in the English language, and trying to get the perfect word for dukkha, for suffering, because there are various views and opinions about whether suffering is the proper translation for the Pali word dukkha. And then when you get into that which has no form, into silence, into the silence of consciousness, what do you call that? Is it, you call it consciousness, or you call it Dhamma, or you call it the unborn, the uncreated, or the unconditioned. They're all words pointing to the absence of a word, of a concept. It's not an object anymore. So after a while you begin to recognize consciousness and Dhamma. They're both, at this very moment in every single human being's experience apparent here and now. Everybody knows they're conscious, and the translation for Santitiko, Pali word for Santitiko Dhamma, is apparent here and now. And just learning to trust this kind of intuitive awareness of experience rather than trying to define it with words makes life much more simple. It becomes, rather than becoming more complicated, more abstract, more confusing, everything simplifies to ultimate simplicity. So that which is not born, doesn't die, doesn't begin or end, whatever you call it, consciousness. Some people, might argue about that, but in terms of experience, consciousness isn't born. I don't create consciousness. It's not a word. I mean, it is a word, but it just points to the reality of being here and now, which is very apparent for every single human being.
And so when one talks about realizing Dhamma, it's about realizing that in one's experience.
Realizing when consciousness knows itself, it's no longer being used as through forms, through the senses, through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, or thinking. When you're not involved in sensory, sending the senses outward to their objects, what's left is still awareness. And it's like the space between words, like that which is behind, that is present all the time, no matter if you're going mad or you're peaceful or you're a very good, virtuous person or a very corrupt one. Consciousness is always here and now, and it's always pure. It's not stained by the actions or inactions or forms that appear, that arise and appear and manifest in consciousness. So you could say consciousness is the unmanifest. It's not that you can't find it as an object. It's not something you can show somebody else, but you know very directly because it's what we really are. Where that consciousness is our true nature, the forms that we identify with, such as the sentient experiences through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, feeling, through the five khandhas. These are very mortal, changing, unstable forms that arise and cease in consciousness. Where consciousness doesn't arise and cease, it's always here and now, timeless. It encourages us to, the Buddha encouraged us to investigate consciousness, to really notice it, get beyond the limitation of words, of thoughts, of feelings, to recognize what we call awareness, being aware of itself. And in Thai, they call it tit and tit, when the consciousness knows itself.
So you spoke about recognizing the space between thoughts as one way of noticing the awareness of thoughts. And then when thoughts cease, you're there with awareness. And then some people have been talking about how thoughts go quiet, but the five senses are still operating. So that's not yet consciousness without objects, because they're still objects of the senses arising. How would you suggest working with that?
Well, look at consciousness as the kind of the substratum. It's ultimate reality, really. Mm-hmm. Just take a sentence, a kind of mundane, ordinary thought, such as I am a human being. And, the words arise and cease. And before I even think the the pronoun I, here there's consciousness, but we don't notice it. It's empty, it's aware, and then we intentionally think I, and then there's space between I and M, space between M and A, and space between A and human, and space between human and being. And after you've thought being, there's still space or consciousness. The consciousness remains the same, whatever words you put into it. It's always the stable factor, the stillness that we, and serenity that every human being longs for. So it's never absent from us, we just don't notice it. We become so involved with the words. We're very thinking kind of cerebral species. We, unlike other species of mammals, we think a lot. We have vibrant vocabulary. We're full of ideas, concepts, objects to think about. And is the silent consciousness or the sound of silence an object? Or is it Dhammachara? Is it natural? Is it Dhamma? That's what we really are. Some people think when I talk about the silence or sound of silence, that it's still an object of awareness, where it is awareness aware of itself. And it's not an object that arises and ceases. So we can call that objectless awareness, because even though, there's awareness and there's a silence, it's not an object that you can get beyond. Try it. I used to spend hours meditating on trying to get beyond the silence, because I had this idea of objectless awareness as the ultimate goal, only to never find a way beyond it. You can always add to it with thoughts, with feelings, distracting yourself through looking at things or talking or eating or various ways to distract the mind from the awareness, that the awareness of itself. But that's not, when you see the futility, when you get to the place of no return, you can't get beyond the silence. And it's peaceful. Suddenly you realize that peacefulness is our very nature. It's with us all the time. When we're looking for it externally, we're never quite, we have peaceful moments when everything's quiet, but you can't sustain that kind of peace. It has no sustainability because it's subject to so much interruption, distraction, problems, worldly problems, even the changing of the weather and so forth. And what can you can't find peace, real peace that doesn't arise and cease in sankharas, because the very nature of sankharas, conditions or phenomenon, is that they are always in the process of change, of transition from birth to death, from beginning to ending. So the futile efforts to find peace as some kind of external control over the environment where everything is quiet and not distracted. You have moments where you feel peace with that particular scenic situation, but it's not sustainable peace. Where this kind of peace, consciousness, aware of consciousness, is with us all the time, even in the midst of the battlefield. The battlefield arises and ceases, but what is the basis behind the battlefield, the conflicts, the fears, the desires that we have, that we create into consciousness, is always present. And so this is, what we call the release from suffering. It's the reality of Nirodha. The suffering ends, even though you still may have a physical body that's aging, sick, and all kinds of problems in the family, in the society, in the world, and with climate change, COVID-19, pandemic. How can we ever find peace when all these terrible things are happening around us? But, when we're looking for a world where there's no pandemic, where the climate is stable forever, you're going to be terribly disappointed, because that's not the way it is. That's not the Dhamma. The Dhamma is apparent here and now, so it's not changing. And what doesn't change in our experience, always in the present moment, is consciousness. We can call it consciousness, we can call it Dhamma, the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. But what it is like this. It doesn't matter what you call it so much as to recognize that this is the end of suffering. And it's non-personal. Consciousness is not, started as soon as you start to personify it, you've lost it, because to personify consciousness, you have to start thinking. Consciousness is me, it's mine, I'm conscious. And if you stop thinking, then what's left is consciousness. But it doesn't say it belongs to anybody. It doesn't make value judgments. It doesn't criticize. In order to make value judgments, to criticize, to say this is the best, or this is the highest, or this is the lowest, you have to start thinking. And the space between thoughts is awareness that doesn't arise and cease. The space, the silence between thoughts, the silence behind thoughts is the same silence. It's not it doesn't shift or change into any other than just, it's like this silent mind, the serenity that one enjoys from it. Once you're willing to recognize it and surrender to it, you have to abide in it, let it be you, rather than always creating yourself as someone with problems, someone with doubts, with a man or a woman, or a rightist or a leftist, or whatever identities you prefer to use for your own experience of life. You give up all that. There's no identity. There's nothing to identify with, because this is universal consciousness. It's not Ajahn Sumedho's consciousness or Ajahn Asoka's consciousness. It's just consciousness universal. It's perfect. It's complete.
So in order to realize this awareness that is aware of phenomena arising and ceasing, we don't need to get rid of phenomena. We don't need to get rid of experience of emotions, feelings, experience in order to realize this, do we?
No, because they're not really the problem. This is around, that we're experiencing in a human form, and it's fraught with old age, sickness, death, loss, grief, sorrow, despair, and anguish. And we have senses, so we an enlightened being still sees, hears, smells, tastes, touch, thinks, and feels life. It's not that you suddenly become like a zombie or an alien. You can't relate to the conditioned realm. I mean, that is not, that's just impossible, because when we have insight into Dhamma, we, no matter how profound it might be, we still have a human form that is aging. Like tomorrow, on the 27th of July, I'll be 86. The 86-year-old phenomenon that was born 86 years ago. And do I claim it as, they say, it's my birthday, these are conventions, Ajahn Sumedho's 86th birthday, it's a convention. But actually, consciousness, this doesn't have an age. Bodies have ages, as we all are very much aware of. Nobody's going to argue that point. So even the Buddha got old, got sick, and died. And even the Lord Buddha himself of 2,563 years ago, after a perfect, complete enlightenment, still had to live with his body till the body no longer sustained consciousness. But consciousness didn't die with the Buddha. The Buddha didn't really die. The body of the Buddha died, that was all. But this Buddha is the awareness, this consciousness, Buddha, Dhamma, consciousness aware of itself. They're not just historical events in the Buddhist religion. It's beyond that. When we take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, it's not taking refuge in something of the past. It's always the present. When Luang Por Chah was encouraging us to use the Kamborikan, the mantra, Bhutto, that's the Buddha's name. So it's apparent here and now to know, isn't it? To Guru, they translate Bhutto into the Thai as Guru, the knowing. So consciousness is knowing. It's not personal, though. It's like me knowing. I have to think and think about that I am the knowing, or I am the knower. But if I stop thinking, there's still knowing. In the silence of consciousness, aware of itself, there's knowing. It's like this. It's not judging anything. It's not, we use our thinking mind as our way of experiencing life. We have to define sankharas, we have to define conditions, define phenomena, give them, whether we think they're important, unimportant, beautiful, ugly, good or bad. We always have some kind of reaction to criticize or define it with a quality. But qualities are all sankharas, they're all changing phenomena. And in the scriptures, the suttas of the Tripitaka, the Buddha emphasizes that phenomena, sankharas, conditions, are empty. They have no soul. They have no. They're not a real person. They're a kind of a permanent person or a permanent soul or entity. They are empty phenomena. And what is an empty phenomena is consciousness. It's what life is. What is life itself? These conditions, without consciousness, wouldn't exist. You couldn't have a body and a mind without consciousness. So a dead body is no longer conscious of itself. It's the senses start decaying, and the body goes through the process of disintegration and decay, which is what it's supposed to do, because it's nothing but food. It's a sack of food that we identify with and give so much importance to. That's why we have to eat every day, because you can't live on thin air, but the body needs food for its survival. And yet the body is our main identity, what we look like, whether we're black or white, male or female, tall or short, fat or thin. This is definitely where we create endless egotistical problems and worries about our appearance and our age, our gender. There's no end to those kind of problems. You start with one, you create 10 more kind of problems around the same thing. But when you let go of sankharas, relinquishing your grip, your blind, ignorant grip of sankharas, what's left when you've let go, you've not destroyed them, you don't have to annihilate them, terminate them in any way, just loosen your grip. It's this blind attachment, ignorant conditioned attachment to phenomenon that is the cause of suffering. And this can be proved when we observe. If you begin to recognize, to realize the gap between the words, the silence behind the sound, then you realize your true nature is that. It's not you're not a phenomenon, you're not a condition that depends on other conditions for survival. And so there's nothing to be afraid of. Where death for most of us, for most people, is, something that we think, it means the end of everything. The body dies, the body decays, it gets cremated or buried, or whatever custom you might choose, or someone else might choose after you're dead. It disintegrates on its own. You don't have to get rid of it. And one can always access the silence, sound of silence, pure consciousness, awareness, because it's a kalika Dhamma, it's timeless. It's not dependent on time, on a beginning or an end, where objects that we see through the senses are all about time-bound conditions. Every thought has a beginning and an ending. Every emotion has a beginning and an ending. Everything we see, everything we hear, smell, taste, touch, the universe has a beginning and an ending. So, the beginning and ending is the very nature of what we call in Pali Sankhara, or phenomena, or conditions. What isn't conditioned then? Can one condition know another condition? Do you think a sankhara can know another sankhara? It doesn't work that way, because sankharas are empty. They have no life of their own except through consciousness. So consciousness brings life into the body. It's the light, the luminosity of consciousness that we are, rather than the physical form that we are blindly, ignorantly attached to and identified with.
Nopa, you speak about trusting the awareness. You often encourage people to trust the awareness. What are you pointing at there, using the word trust rather than another one?
Well, we're so conditioned, our cultural conditioning, from the time you're born. You start like a newborn baby isn't conditioned yet. It is conscious being. The human form is conscious. The consciousness is not personal. It's natural. So the baby didn't create consciousness, but the form, a human baby born and alive, is a conscious form. It doesn't identify itself with anything. It has no language, no memory to think about things, to pass value judgments about anything. And then after birth, it's conditioned, by the mother, by the father, by the family, by the social background, by the culture, by the religion. All these, are conditions that are imposed on newborn infants, children, as they're growing up. We're we identify with empty phenomena as ourself, as our personality. When you try to find a living person, when you really look inward and ask yourself, is there a real person? Is there a real Ajahn Sumedho inside this body? The mind goes quiet. I can't find Ajahn Sumedho. I can think Ajahn Sumedho. I wasn't born with that name. It was given to me when I was 31 years old. Sumedho anyway, not Ajahn. But that's the name that people identify me in this life as Ajahn Sumedho, Lumpur Sumedho. But when I look for Lumpur Sumedho, I see a body, 86-year-old body. Is that Ajahn Sumedho? Is it on a conventional level? Yes, you have to, use conventions for communication. We realize that. But Ajahn Sumedho is only a convention. It's not a person, a kind of permanent personality, a permanent soul, a permanent reality. And when I try to find it, look inward to see where Ajahn Sumedho is located, I can't find anything except silence, awareness.
It's weird. So what is the trusting?
Trusting is because we're so highly conditioned. We trust the conditioning. Like in my own experience, and believing that I'm Ajahn Sumedho all the time. It's something, I never questioned until I became a monk. And I just assumed, I was Robert Jackman, because my mother told me that was my name. So that was my first name. And I assumed that when I became Ajahn Sumedho, then I started using that. I think it was Robert Jackman, and it's a convention you might have on your passport or something, but there's no such thing as Robert Jackman. In my British passport, it's Bhikkhu Sumedho. These are conventions. They're for worldly relationships, for existing in society. But am I really Robert Jackman, Ajahn Sumedho? And I've acquired a few new names as my age gets, as I get more years in the Sangha. They're conventions only, they're empty phenomena. But what I do realize that is from birth to this very moment, sitting here in my kuti at Wat Ratanawan, is awareness. And then the advice of the Buddha is to trust this awareness, to make it clear, to make it, your real refuge, and to recognize it, the silence, the sound of silence, consciousness knowing itself is like this. So you're not, when I use the words, it's like this, it's not defining it, is it? It's more or less reminding yourself, it's this simple, it's this awareness that you must trust, not the critical views about yourself or others that you tend to be conditioned to believe in. This is beyond belief. This isn't about believing in Dhamma or in Buddhism or anything like that. It's about trusting in the reality that we experience through this kind of awareness. The awareness itself is the means that humanity has to access immortality, to realize perfection, to realize that they're not what they think and believe, what they're conditioned to to identify with. They're not like that. Those conditions arise and cease and then, operate according to other conditions. But but what is it that knows the arising and ceasing? Who knows thinking? You know you're thinking when you're thinking. But do you know non-thinking? You can know it if you trust your awareness, not just try to think about non-thinking, but observe the gap between one thought and the next, between two thoughts. That gap itself is consciousness that doesn't arise and cease. It's non-personal. And we begin to trust that. And it takes a while to really, that's where what I call real meditation or bhavana is cultivating that, intentionally referring to that in a constant way as much as possible, not to get entangled so much in the conventions of my life that affect, the presence, absence, and happiness and suffering of myself and the community I live with, the society I'm in, but to really put forth the enormous kind of determination to stand as this awareness, be this, because that's what one is. It doesn't change. And it's the end of suffering. Because if you're patient and willing to access, to recognize this, trust it, there's no suffering in it. You can't suffer. Suffering ceases. Yeah. It's the end of suffering, the Nirodha. The end of suffering is as taught by the Buddha as the third noble truth.
Thank you very much, Paul.
And London.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I'd be curious about any comments or questions about that talk.
That's more fault. We're at the real workshop.
What?
So today is
It's playing again.
Saturday, the
Yeah.
19th of September. Thank you for doing another one of these sessions.
There we go. I guess autoplay or something was on. Yeah, any questions?
Well, I'm not even sure what metaphysics is, but that seemed like it was metaphysical. I don't know. That word comes to mind. I'd have to look it up. But it seemed very kind of abstract and challenging us to really think beyond thinking kind of thing. So I found it a challenge. And I guess what I took away from it was that what he's perhaps trying to get us to see is that, beneath everything is awareness or consciousness. And I guess I'm curious as to whether he is awareness and consciousness the same thing for him. I got a little lost in that, but that's what I took away from it, that we're supposed to trust that beneath everything, there's just this awareness and this consciousness, and to plug into it. If we can plug into it and transcend everything, then there's no suffering. So I'd appreciate comments on whether, that interpretation or whatever.
Yeah, that's you summed it up very well. So there was, I don't think there's really, the mind may say it's confused, you're confused, but you said very clearly what the talk was about. Very clearly. Yeah, the words, consciousness, awareness, silence, quiet, unborn, unconditioned, unmanifested. There's all words pointing to the same thing that can't be described by words. So, um, yeah. So you notice I use the word awareness a lot, stillness. I started to use consciousness a bit today just because I knew he was going to use it in the talk, but it's a, so the word isn't so important. It's really touching into the felt sense of that always present context within which all objects arise. So it's that which is always there. So when I said, and I think Annabelle said this last week, that the idea of tuning into the end of a thought train, that there at the end of the thought train, there's just stillness, and you can just feel it. And maybe another thought train starts up. I mean, our minds can be pretty active things, so maybe it's a small space, but you can really sense into that space, and that's what he's pointing to, is the space between words, even, which maybe I find the space at the end. That moment when you're sitting in meditation and your mind's gone, right? It happens to all of us probably every time we sit, multiple times. The mind's gone, it's thinking about something, but somehow something recognizes that, I'm lost in thought, right? And regardless of what happens next, the instruction is to gently guide my attention back to whatever it might be. Regardless of what the technique or the instruction is, just tune into that moment when that recognition of being lost in thought comes, thought ends. All that's there is still awareness, still consciousness. So that's what he's inviting us to tune into, to dwell in that place. I think he used the word patience, because to dwell in that place will take some patience, because the mind wants to jump in again, or you may feel that still awareness. Of course, then the mind starts commenting on it. Well, is that really what it feels like? Am I really feeling it, or is this just so then the mind starts up again, but eventually it does end, that thought train, and then the context or the background within which all that action takes place, all that movement, is the conscious awareness. The ego mind, the me, is in constant movement. It's constant struggle, really, with what is, constantly trying to control, grasp what's pleasant, push away what's unpleasant. It's this constant movement. If you notice that's what the ego mind, or the survival mind, or the little me, the false self, whatever you want to call it, is doing constantly. It's in constant movement, constant making noise constantly. It's another thing, you can contrast it to stillness. There's constant noise, constant movement, but behind all that, underneath all that, is what Ajahn was pointing to as consciousness or awareness. And what's really telling in what he said is we don't have to do anything with all that. We don't have to get rid of it. We don't have to treat it, purify it. It's simply touching into what's underneath all that. That's still awareness. And for Ajahn to say that is quite different. I've never actually heard a Theravada monk speak in that way. So it's he's just saying. I think as he's getting older, he's just kind of just saying it the way it is. This it's just putting it out there, right? And he doesn't know who's listening either on a video, right? So these teachers tend to teach to the audience. He's teaching to whoever's aspiring or whoever's yearning to know their true nature. That's who that talk was directed at. Whoever's yearning to see and connect with their true nature, that Buddha nature, the pure mind, whatever you want to call it. Again, just words. That's who that talk was directed at, I think, and what makes it so beautiful.
One concept I have always had a really difficult time getting my head around is reincarnation. But when he spoke tonight, he talked about the body disintegrating. But I think if I understood him right, he said that consciousness is always there. And if we think of consciousness always existing, and that when one body dies, another body is born, and that collective consciousness is shared among the living, then that kind of makes sense to me. Can you comment on that?
He said that consciousness is immortal. Again, I've never heard an Ajahn say that. This is a kind of a talk of all talks. Like that's why I shared it. I don't know what that means. I'm reflecting on that idea. So that's something I've experienced. The closest I guess I could say that I can relate to in my personal experience is that seeing that the nature, that consciousness is the same for all beings. And he pointed to that. It doesn't matter how good or non-good, evil, or that you are. There's the same consciousness exists, and working with people who are in prison or have done things that we would consider as a society doing harm. There's still that sense of consciousness that's present. It's the same. We're all equal in that sense. We all have that as already and always present true nature. Well, the immortal part, that's something to reflect on. Is that what's being pointed to in terms of rebirth? I don't know. Yeah, and I probably won't spend any time thinking about it. But see, that's a seed that's been planted, right? Now the mind is going to want to do something with it. So that's what I say. I'm not going to do anything with it. What I mean is I'm not going to sit and think about it. But there's the seed in consciousness that's been planted. So, there'll be a sensing into my life. Is this true? These can always be explored through direct experience. I mean, that one might be tough, right? Until one dies and sees what happens. Sees what happens to consciousness. I guess for me right now, all I can do is be aware to the extent that perhaps I can be conscious during death, right? So fear isn't overtaking the mind body during death, but there's conscious awareness through the process of death. Yeah. There's a certain trust I have also for Ajahn Sumedho. Certain, and he, the fact that he said something like that, at some point, maybe I'll ask him a question about it if I have that opportunity. Oh, we're not hearing you.
Will you try muting and unmuting yourself again?
Still no? You could write your question down on a piece of paper and hold it in front of the camera.
We have chat, actually, so he could write it on chat.
Yes, that's true. We do have chat. Like somebody's written something in chat in here. Oh. We'll try to reconnect. Yeah. Anybody else?
I really liked this talk. I mean, I thought it was like I kept trying to visualize visualize consciousness as being sort of a space, and that my thoughts and my feelings were sort of within that space, and consciousness was sort of like was like an observer of all things, and I know it's sort of I guess it's my way of trying to understand it, and in terms of of trying to make that kind of that thinking process smaller and smaller in some ways, to less chattery, and then that space around it would be there. I mean, it was, I don't know. I'm always trying to kind of figure out some way of being able to kind of see, in a sense, the that space and where those thoughts are. I mean, was. And I'm not even sure whether that's sort of a way of getting lost again, but I liked it. I mean, it was a way for me to kind of think about how he's expressing himself and what he sees consciousness as a sort of third outside thing, Is where I'm going with that one. I don't know, but I like to talk.
Mm-hmm. So metaphors can be really helpful, and you sort of gave a metaphor of space. So if you think of a room, and there's a space in the room, it's a space. Whatever comes into the room the space of the room isn't affected by it. Space stays the same. It just receives whatever noise is put into the room, whatever forms are put into the room, and the space of the room remains as it is, unaffected. So that's a metaphor that you can use to kind of relate to the nature of pure consciousness or awareness. People use the sky. The sky remains the sky regardless of what forms, what conditioned phenomena, sankharas come into it. So it's another metaphor. So these metaphors can be helpful. Just hold them lightly and just kind of just reflect and kind of get the felt sense for it, of what the feeling into being that space is like, what it feels like. Yeah, it can be very helpful because it can, as Anita said, it can sound very abstract if we're just trying to think about it. So to really understand this, or to, let's say, to know it, it really must be a felt sense, more felt in the body, felt as a, more felt in the body as opposed to the mind. Might be a better way to, one way to put it. Yeah.
I found that my mind got really still listening to the talk. And I felt like this profound, just kind of centeredness. And my mind felt really relaxed. Like there were these concepts were washing by, but I didn't feel like I needed to grab onto them. Like I found it really restful, the concepts that he was talking about. I think sometimes I run around and try to like get all the definitions and all the quotes and take notes and stuff. And that wasn't my experience at all this time. I really, really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Alan. Welcome back.
I love that talk. There's just so many different things that he was raising, and they just seem so profound. On the issue that Maureen was raising about reincarnation, I was also really intrigued with what he was saying, or seemed to be suggesting this immortality of consciousness. Now, like I've heard that in Buddhism, there are some different arguments about whether with reincarnation, like, is it the same sort of entity that sort of continues, or is it sort of all mixed up again and just you're sort of part of a broader energy that sort of recontinues? But he did say in there that Ajahn Sumedho doesn't continue, but I think he also said the soul doesn't. So I was wondering if he was pointing to some sort of collective consciousness that sort of carries on. And anyways, I'm going to be doing some reflection on that. I found that really interesting. I had a question about, partly about the meditation. So you were, asking us to rest in stillness, in awareness and consciousness. And one of the instructions was sort of to let go, not to control, or to stop controlling. And I kind of feel that I can sort of get glimpses of that, just being in stillness and be there, but it's not really sustainable for very long. And I have to be almost putting in a constant effort to stay there. And that feels kind of like controlling. And I know we had the instruction, okay, you notice there's a thought and you bring yourself back. I mean, there's a little bit of controlling just in that idea. But for me, it feels like a lot of energy is going in staying there. Now, Ajahn Sumedho talked about trusting, and I think he'd used the word determination. Wasn't quite sure in what sense, but it sounded like, part of the trusting is, determining, or developing some determination to sort of stay with it. I don't know if I was misunderstanding, but I'm struggling with the relationship between just sort of being sort of naturally, which doesn't seem to happen very easily, and making the effort to sort of be in that awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I won't. Some people are saying goodbye, so goodbye. I won't say too much about right effort. Simply, it is one of the aspects of the Eightfold Path. So the Buddha put some emphasis on how effort is applied. I think Sumedho said trust, and I think he said patience. So I would, and my reading of students in Canada that I've worked with is we tend to over effort more than under effort. There tends to be almost a striving that comes to the yearning. So the yearning for the truth arises, which is what brings us here, right? You wouldn't spend your Thursday nights doing this if there wasn't a really deep, profound yearning that's arising. And what that is it's consciousness wanting to become aware of itself. There's this drive. And you've drank the Kool-Aid at this point. You're down the rabbit hole. Like, you can put this aside, and I'll tell you, the fact that many of you have come this long on Thursday night, you're done. You're not going to be able to leave this. You're going to, if you put this aside, it'll be maybe for a year, maybe for 2. You're going to distract yourself with a lot of objects, home renos, traveling, relationships, whatever it might be, but you'll be back, right? It'll come back. The yearning will arise again. It's been felt enough that it's just not going to go away. So I don't really think we need to bring all that much effort to it. In fact, I'm increasingly letting go of effort. So if my mind in a particular moment has decided that it's just going to babble on, it's just going to rattle out thoughts, narrative, my approach now is I simply rest in the aware, conscious knowing that that's what the mind's doing. There's no any sense of needing to do anything else with it. And it's just allowing that whole show to just occur, to unfold naturally, because that's what the mind's doing. I don't need to figure out why it's doing that. I don't need, there's no need to do anything. So that's a real relaxing into not struggling with the present moment. So that's where I would tend to put the emphasis, is on letting go of struggle altogether and seeing how that plays out. And how it might play out at first is, there just might be mind going on and on and on for some time. But you know what? It wears itself out eventually. If you're not grabbing onto thoughts and entertaining them, it's quite amazing actually how the mind starts to just almost lose interest in producing thoughts that this being is not doing anything with. It's like, and I don't know, that's this kind of then this settling that kind of naturally occurs, naturally unfolds. if it's just left alone. So anyway, play around with that and see if that's true in your experience. Yeah, and I actually have a meeting set up with Ajahn Sumedho for Tuesday, I think it is. So I'll ask him about the consciousness, immortality, and I'll report back what he might have to say. He was also a student of Ajahn Sumedho, so they're good friends actually. So we'll see how if there's more. So stay tuned for part 2 of Immortality. So thanks again. Thanks everyone for coming out, and be well. We will see you next week.
Thanks, Stephen.
Namaste.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye, everybody.